Good morning, everybody. Sorry I missed last week. Last week was Super Bowl Sunday, wasn't it? I think it was. Seems like it. So I think I was in a different location than I had already planned on. So sorry that I missed last week's live. I do know that I did have some questions, so I will pull those questions up and we can talk about them. This week, the crickets are little, so there's not a lot to be done on the actual cricket farming side, but I am working on building up a whole bunch of inventory on the actual food side because of a really cool opportunity that I have that will take me away from business for a while. The other thing I'm working on and I'm a part of at the moment, and we do our meetings on Sundays. We have one earlier this Sunday than we normally have, is I am part of the planning committee, behind the scenes committee for the future of food at South by Southwest, which is coming up, I believe, the 12th of March. 11th and 12th of March are the very first big things we have. I know full days at South by, I'm pretty sure we have the 12th and the 18th, and then there's a whole bunch of different events in there. So those are some of the projects that have been taking up my time and things like that. Sorry if you do end up seeing some sort of additional live video this morning. I was trying to find a quiet place to record, which is freaking nearly impossible. And the place that I found, the internet was not working super well, so it ended up freezing my computer and everything, and I had to restart everything. So it's been one of those mornings in some of those respects, but let me see what I had for questions, because I did have a few this past week. I had a few that got asked on 2 weeks ago's live that I said I would address, and I always try, before I do some sort of live or something like this, I always try to answer the questions via text or via me typing them, and sometimes it's better when I have the freedom to talk it out, kind of deal, and explain a little further. So let me go ahead and go back. I suppose it is 13 days ago, would have been when the last live Q&A was. So let me see what I said, because there are, like I said, there are quite a few questions, some that got asked on the actual live from the previous one. Okay, so first question is, I want to know how many crickets you can fit in a tub of yours. I want to grow a couple of tubs. So first things first, our tubs that you see in all my other videos, they're gray, they're plastic, Sterlite brand. They're 50-gallon tubs. So in those 50-gallon tubs, we look for a density of anywhere between 5,000 and 7,500 crickets per 50-gallon bin. And I say this with an asterisk, because just because I can raise between 5,000 and 7,500 does not mean that necessarily in your setup with your conditions you will be able to do the same. You also may be able to do way more than me because you have a higher quality ventilation, higher air quality. Lots of different factors go into it. So I think if you can shoot for 5,000 within those 50-gallon tubs, I think you're going to be doing really, really well. But like I said, for us, between 5,000 and 7,500, I think we're doing really, really well. So then follow-up question for that is, so I'm wondering if it makes sense for me to raise crickets for feed, because good feed is expensive, and how much do they eat through their life cycle? Approximately how much does a cricket weigh live, and how much does it eat until you harvest? So many questions. So good feed is expensive, and I assume that you are looking to feed these crickets, or this cricket, including feed into some other animal feed as the source of protein, as a substitute maybe for things like fish meal and things like that are very expensive. So how much do they eat through their life cycle? So this actually varies again so much on the actual quality of the feed. The higher quality of feed, technically the lower the feed ratio is. So basically, the lower the amount that your crickets are going to need to eat to be able to gain market weight, if you will. I guess that's what you call it in other livestock. So I guess we'll kind of call that with crickets. Um, so if you can get it below 2 pounds of feed per 1 pound of crickets produced, you're doing pretty well. I think like bench tests, lab tests, things like that, you can maybe get down to like 1.3 to 1.6 pounds per pound produced. I kind of call BS on a lot of those. Like it maybe is able to be done in a lab setting, but that doesn't mean that it's able to be done at scale. So I would just assume for any calculations, you're looking at 2 to 2.5 pounds per pound produced. I think that's probably, it's a safe estimation. And quite frankly, when you first start, like it's going to be three or more pounds per pound produced in the beginning, just because you don't know what you're doing. And so you are going to end up with not as many crickets as you think, or not as many crickets as maybe you should, because something else is going to go wrong. So I think if you're looking at initial calculations, plan for between 2 and 2.5 pounds per pound produced. But have the overall goal of getting it below 2 pounds per pound produced eventually. Like you will increase efficiency every single round. So have that goal in mind. That's the way I would look at it. Again, it's really tough for me to tell you exactly like what your conditions are going to produce. Hello from Indonesia. That's pretty cool. So I hope that helps. And then how much does a cricket weigh live? Typically, like a fully grown cricket, I think it's something like 29 grams. No, 29 grams. That would be a heavy cricket. That would be a 1 ounce cricket, which just is not a reality of it. They are less than a gram. So a third of a gram typically at full grown weight. I think that's right. A third of a gram. That sounds more right than 20 something grams. That would be a lot. I'm pretty sure it's a third of a gram per cricket is the assumption. You need a very precise, very small increment scale to be able to measure one of them, which I don't have. I could go get something like a drug scale would probably work really well. So the assumption is about 1,000 to 1,500 live crickets per pound. It varies because your sizes, quite frankly, are going to vary. It's very difficult to nearly impossible to get 100% uniformity in maturity and all of that kind of stuff. So I think probably a good assumption, and that's where 454 grams, I can do that math really fast. I have a calculator here. So if we went 454 grams in a pound, give or take, and divide that by, what did I say, 1,000, equals a half a gram. And if it's 1,500 divided by 1,500, that gives you probably a third of a gram. So I would say it's probably 1,500 crickets per pound, if I had to guess, just based off of what I've seen other folks have talked about in terms of full live weight. So just make the assumption it's somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 crickets per pound, fully grown, fully mature. Obviously, different sizes have different ratios on that. Okay, so that covered that one. Okay, next one. Hey Shelby, I was wondering if I would be concerned about crickets digging holes in breeding trays. I have heard that it's possible for crickets to go back and eat some eggs. Quick side note, this is all within a day or two of placing the bin in, as I remove them within 48 hours or so. Okay. So the first thing I have to say about this is, yes, I've heard of it. I've seen it. It is a fairly common behavior. The females even will burrow these little holes. That's why I always tell people when they are first putting in breeding trays or breeding habitats, do not fill them all the way to the edges, because you will end up with more freaking breeding substrate out everywhere in your growing bin. You will find it on the on the bottom of your bins more than you'll find it in the actual breeding tray if you put too much substrate in there. They kick it around, they dig holes. I can't explain the behavior because I'm not an expert in cricket behavior, but they do end up burrowing, and it's not just the males, it is the females. Now, whether or not they're actually going in and eating the eggs, I don't know. Very possible. Could be that they're doing that. Is it something that we've really had a problem with that has greatly impacted our hatches? No. It hasn't made that big of a difference in terms of our overall hatch and our overall numbers. Now, if I was noticing an uptick in it, generally speaking, I would say if it's causing that much of an impact, either A, you are not getting enough eggs out of the number of crickets that you have. B, something else is wrong. So there's some other source of stress for these crickets that is causing them to need to go eat the eggs for some sort of nutrition value. So it could be that your feed is just not adequate. There's not enough space. All of those things, I think, would exacerbate this behavior and start to cause more problems. So there are ways to deal with it. There are ways to mitigate it. One way is to actually put a physical screen over top of the breeding substrate, the breeding tray. I've seen people do it. It's the same as any other like aluminum screen that you would use for ventilation or things like that. You would just cut a sheet of it, put it over top of your actual your breeding tray, and then you can take like clips and clip it on there. So the females can still climb up on the substrate. They can still stick their ovipositor down into the substrate and deposit the eggs, but nobody can come burrow. Nobody can come eat the eggs. Nobody can do those things. Personally, for me, like I said, we have not seen a gigantic impact in our actual hatch that we have come out of when those behaviors are happening, when holes are dug, when, it appears that maybe some of them have gotten eaten. So to me, adding the screen on top just seems like unnecessary additional labor if there's been no impact at that point. So that'll have to be a you call. If you don't end up hatching very many pinheads out and everything was perfect in the incubation, so you had enough heat, you had enough moisture, you gave it enough time, and you don't see any eggs or you don't have any hatch, then maybe it is cause for concern. But like I said, that the behavior being so widespread and so impactful may be related to something else that you need to address in terms of a stress being caused to the crickets. So there's a lot of things to think about there. There are options. Like I said, if it is making an impact, you could try doing the screen technique for a couple rounds and see if it helps. But if you are still getting eggs, if you're still getting eggs laid, or you think you're getting eggs laid, and after the screen thing, and there's no way for them to eat them or anything, it's probably a good indication that something else is wrong. So I hope that was helpful. Okay, so I have a question in the chat. I'm looking for some crickets locally. You're from Turkey. Hello, welcome from Turkey. That's cool. I never ever found it. I check our species, try to get them wild first when I first start. Is there any way you can suggest for catching wild ones to start? Wow. So I have no familiarity with the available cricket species in Turkey. So I don't even know what they would look like over there. I'm sure there's multiple species, and I don't necessarily know what kind of habitats they like. If you are going to go the wild caught way, like, you definitely need to make sure that you get some males and some females. Depending on the species, again, like generally speaking, the males are the only ones that chirp, and the females are the ones that have an ovipositor, so they have an additional spike coming out of their back end. Best way to catch them, I would just learn about their habitat, learn what they like, learn what they're attracted to food-wise, and see if you can set something up that way. The additional challenge is most likely whatever is going to attract the crickets that are wild is going to attract other insects as well. So that makes that a really tough way to start, and a tough way to start a clean colony that doesn't have some sort of additional insect infestation. So I don't necessarily have a great answer for you on how to find them in the wild. And I don't even know where to tell you to start on that. I'm sorry. It's just that's so outside of my wheelhouse. Um, I would be able, if I had some familiarity with the species, like I said, um, I could give you a little bit more of help on that one. But I would say that you do definitely need to do some research on what do typical wild crickets in your area eat. What do they need for housing? What do they need for water? And if you can set up that sort of a habitat that is easily accessible to them, you should be able to find something. You should be able to attract some crickets. I can't say that it'll be 100% success rate, but that's where I would start if that was the way I was going to go. I'm sorry you don't have access to any other crickets where you are in Turkey. Sometimes we just have to make do with what we can find in the wild. So I hope that works, but that's what I would do. I would see what they like from a natural habitat standpoint and see if I can lure them in. And then at that point, hopefully you can find yourself at least a few males and a few females, and you can go ahead and start your colony that way. And then if you can add some additional, like if you can catch some additional wild ones through the year or whatever, that would be a good way to go. That's the other thing. You may want to check into like the seasons that your crickets, thank you for watching. You may want to check into like when is cricket season, if you will. So here in Iowa, the fully grown crickets, the chirping crickets, the ones that annoy everybody, they become most active like end of August into September, and that's because they're kind of in a last ditch effort to breed before winter hits, and so they're trying to get all sorts of eggs laid everywhere, all of those things, because they know the end is near. So I would call that cricket season for us around here. That being said, like they are around all year. It's just that most people don't notice them when they are in the nymph stage. They don't really notice them until the males start chirping in everybody's house, which seems to always happen in the fall. So I hope that was helpful. Let me return to my questions that I had. I did have one comment about somebody went and watched the other channel that my boyfriend and I started with our building renovation that we're doing, and they said that building isn't safe yet. It's definitely not, but we're getting there. The foundation won't last in an earthquake. The foundation's pretty freaking solid, and we don't get a ton of earthquakes here in Iowa, so luckily. The only time we ever get really big earthquakes is like when it's a world disaster, so I think we'll have other things to worry about, but who knows. There may also be toxic stuff in the air as you move stuff around. It's always a possibility whenever you're doing something where you're renovating, and I would await grant money and let professionals, contractor teams deal with it, or offloader level, you don't get the grant. We understand the risk we're getting into, but thank you for the concern. Do appreciate it. Okay. And I did have somebody comment that they can't seem to catch any of my lives anymore. You seem to come on really early now. And I was typically doing them at 8:30 in the morning, but I went a little later with this one because I knew I have another computer meeting coming up in an hour or so. So I was like, well, I will move my live back a little bit, and I'll just do all of it now. So I might see about doing a little bit later time. I definitely won't do it next week because I do know I have a brunch next week. So a little bit later won't work, and I can't do the afternoon because I actually need to work in the afternoon because there's no rest for the wicked on that. Okay, another question that dealing again with a native cricket species seems to be coming up a lot, which actually I think is kind of cool that people are interested in raising their native crickets. That being said, they may not be optimal for whatever you want to use them for, but there's no reason that you can't necessarily use the native resources there. And I think most of the basics of, environment, feed, housing, all of that kind of stuff, I think no matter the species, it's probably going to stay relatively similar. So a lot of the advice and stuff that I have will probably be very similar but there may be different little quirks within each breed. So just take that as you will. Okay, this question is, I'm trying to breed a native burrowing cricket species, Lepidogryllus siamensis. Don't know what that is. Anyways, due to me being highly allergic to most feeders available here. That's a bummer. You are not the first person I've heard of being allergic to different feeders. There's a fair number of people that are like allergic to cockroaches to the point where they like can't even handle them. I'm sure that is common on some other insects, and it's just something that I don't necessarily understand, like a chemical they're putting off, or just I don't know what you call the allergic little molecule, allergy molecule. It's not an antigen. It's an allergen, but that's not the word. There's a different word that I'm looking for, and it's just not coming to my head. Highly allergic to most feeders available. Okay, your videos are helping me a lot during my test run with 2 spotted cricket, Gryllus bimaculatus. Gryllus bimaculatus. Do you have any tips on keeping moist-dependent species of crickets? So this is interesting. No, I don't have any tips on that, unfortunately. And a moisture-dependent species of cricket would be a lot more difficult to rear and house and all of those things, in my mind, because the higher the moisture level of your habitats, the larger the risk for mold of everything else. So of housing, of feed, of frass, of all of that kind of stuff. So you would have to almost have a higher level of hygiene, I think, to keep other issues at bay. And this is me assuming that moisture dependent species means that you have to have a higher moisture level. Now, if you need a lower moisture level, totally different. In some ways that makes things easier, like I said, to control mold in your housing and your feed and all of those other things. So I don't have a ton of input there other than make use of things like humidifiers and stuff like that. I mean, at the end of the day, all crickets, particularly in like the early nymph stage, like pinheads, are moisture dependent. They don't have a fully formed exoskeleton, so it needs to be more humid than the rest of the life cycle. So okay, so I asked, I don't know much about the particular species. Do they require a higher humidity? And he said they're subtropical burrower species, so I think they do, while the other one requires a bit lower side humidity since the young nymph. So one of those, like I said, you are going to maybe need a higher moisture level, but I doubt that it would be beneficial to go above 60%, because like I said, then you're just starting to cause mold issues in other areas that I think 60% should maybe get it done. But again, I just don't have the familiarity with species. So bummer on the allergy thing though. That sucks. Okay. So this question came from my Raising Crickets at Home series, specifically on the breeding and incubation. And this one, should the egg trays be misted? Maybe is the answer to that one. So with the breeding substrate, it is a really delicate balance between getting too much moisture and having just enough moisture. Too little moisture, they dry out. The eggs are non-viable. You can rehydrate them, but they're not going to hatch. Like, it's a bummer when that happens. It's really frustrating when that happens if you're not keeping it close enough eye, like I did this last round, and it is winter and the heaters are always going and the humidity level drops because it's freaking minus whatever outside. You lose a bunch of viable eggs, and just a dumb mistake that I knew better than to do. So in that situation, yes, they definitely should be misted. However, in the peak of the summer, when humidity is more of a problem, if the egg trays still look moist, do not add moisture to them. You can add too much moisture and things can rot. So it is really a delicate balance. You will get the feel for it. I would say that you are, generally speaking, most people are more at risk of drying out their substrate and not hatching them than they are overwatering them. But as soon as I say that, somebody will overwater them and things will rot. So it is a possibility that you can have too much. As long as things do not look totally dry, I think you're probably okay. You can mist them a little bit every day if that's what works best for you. But do keep an eye on it until you get a good feel of what your environment does. And do be aware, like I said, so in the winter here, when it gets really cold and the relative humidity drops massively, we have to spray breeding trays down as they incubate more often than we would if it wasn't so cold and it wasn't so dry in the air. So it will vary season to season. Okay, next question coming from the breeding crickets of how to get the pinheads out of the trays, which is one of my recent videos. Do you only feed them that powder stuff, and have you ever thought about using oranges or potatoes? So if you've seen some of my other videos, you know that the pinheads at the very beginning of their life, once they're first hatched, we also use potatoes to feed them. So we do feed them the actual insect diet from Bioforge Labs, and then we also have slices of potatoes, which I will show you this magical thing that I bought off of Amazon that works really well to slice potatoes in like 2 seconds, and I wish I would have gotten it years ago. But so we use potatoes. You could use oranges. I would never really recommend using fruit. Because of the attraction of fruit flies, they are much quicker to like mold and cause problems that way. Potatoes just end up longer lived and they store better and everything else. So if you have some sort of fruit that's available versus potatoes, like you can do that, it works, but it's just definitely not my preference. So yes, we do use that as a supplement for both feed and water, because quite frankly, the pinheads, they will get a lot of their moisture from the actual potatoes as well as the water that we have in the habitat. I think that is all of the questions that I have from the last two weeks. So as always, thank you guys for watching. And if you do have any questions, if you were watching this at a later date and you have questions, please drop them in the comments. I do see them come up when they come up. And then when I do next week's or whatever week that I decide to come back and do another live, I pull those questions up and I just go through them. And then, as always, if you are watching this live and you do ever have a question, please drop it in the chat and I will get to it as soon as I can. And any other videos that you're watching, so a reminder, I do upload every Tuesday. I can't remember what I have on for this next Tuesday, but you'll have to tune in noon Central. Every Tuesday is when I upload the video. And yeah, other than that, thank you guys for watching. And like I said, if you do have questions, please drop them in the comments below. If you are not already subscribed, please subscribe. Other than that, I think that's all I have for today. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I will chat with you soon.